Let's go. Oh, Zane, where's that fucking
Yeah, yo, go on this server, bro.
Zane, where's the picture of you with the gun?
Wait, bruh.
Oh, listen, I'll send you all of them.
Wait.
Just gotta Photoshop that.
Definitely.
I'm gonna Photoshop that. What a bitch.
Damn, then you ain't fine, nigga.
You call a girl a bitch
What a
online?
bitch.
Why you calling her a bitch?
Motherfucker.
What happened? I had a motherfucker in the chat, but he left.
Yeah, sadly.
Who said what?
It was Daddy.
Why your name is Daddy?
I don't know. Why is your name Damaging Wheels?
It's a long story.
You really want to hear the origins?
Yes, I do. You want to hear the origins of mine?
Later, but you gotta listen. So there's this disabled kid walking around.
Yo, damaging wheels.
You may tell the origin.
Yo, wheels. Yo, fucking wheels.
The Rampino.
That's me.
Yo, wheels. Yo, Avian. Yo, Avian. The man.
Holy shit, what was it called?
Puta madre.
Ah.
Try and help.
I love that I'm trying to make a conversation.
Nobody's stopping.
Copy and paste.
Vou falar com a Xixana.
Though a name drifted up from the recesses of Stephen's mind, a name he'd read somewhere or had heard. Chapter 1. Rehagen Mulk liked coffee and sex before battle. He stood outside of the Perk coffee shop in downtown Colorado Springs with a silver cup of coffee in his hand and evil thoughts brewing in his head. It was a warm spring day without a cloud in the azure sky. The Rocky Mountains were splendid to the west. Pikes Peak led the charge, poking up like an accusatory finger aimed squarely at God above. Not that Rehagen Mulk believed in any god other than himself. Mulk sipped slowly from the silver cup, taken from an antique Qing Dynasty tea set. Priceless. It was his favorite cup, and throughout his long life, he'd never lost or damaged it. It was with him always. He glanced up at the Antlers Hotel, eyes squinted, brow furrowed. He was blocks away from the secret Eyrie, but he could still see it on top of the skyscraper. He wasn't sure who had owned it previously, but he knew it was the home of a new dragon soul, some punk kid who had power, off-the-charts power, enough power that Mulk had no choice but to put him down. It was kill or be killed, though in truth, Mulk didn't so much mind the killing. Mulk had sent his top hitman, Edgar Vale, after the kid, but Vale was gone. The Denver Fire Department had to scrape him off the pavement in front of the Wells Fargo building. Luckily, Mulk's magician, Gideon Scaramanga, had cast magic to keep such battles hidden from the humans. Humans. Such worthless things. His mercenaries had failed to bring down this Stephen Whip, but now the gloves were off. Mulk had underestimated Whip's powers. He wouldn't make the same mistake twice. He took another long sip from the cup, savoring the bold flavor of the coffee. His escort, Judith, approached him on the street, hips swaying seductively as she walked. She had striking silver hair, which made men glance at her twice. Even though she was 100 years old, she seemed ageless, tall and strong. She was nearly as tall as he was, well over 6 feet. The crow's feet around her eyes only added to her beauty. Matured, like good wine. She'd been the first one to believe in him. At the time, Mulk had been 50 and looking for a prime of his own. Now he ruled the Great Plains primacy and had the respect of dragon souls all over the globe. Because of the Dracarys incident. That and the way he'd kept his prime despite any number of power plays and outright battles. Judith spoke.
Rebecca, Denise, Hatsumi, Ashanta, Mary, and Sabina are in place. We will strike when you give the signal.
Her voice had a light Australian accent, which had mellowed over time. She kissed him, and he enjoyed her warm, wet mouth. His animus was full. Rebecca, Denise, Hatsumi, Ashanta, Mary, and Sabina had made sure of that. He broke the kiss. And the Terror Trio?
In place as well,
Judith assured him. She caressed his long, full beard.
Lana agreed to accompany the trio and another batch of mercenaries. They are growing more expensive because...
Mulk gripped Judith's arm hard, fingers digging in deep. I know why we have to pay the humans so much, he growled, low and threatening. They are more scared of this Stephen Whip than they are of me. Once we murder him, we can renegotiate their prices.
Judith paled. You're hurting me, Rehagen?
Mulk laughed lightly. Hardly. You like our love play violent. This is nothing. He gave her arm one more last brutal squeeze. There wouldn't be a bruise. Judith was made of stern stuff. Mulk drained the last of his coffee. He opened his suit coat, handcrafted in Italy, and slid his tea bowl into his secret pocket. Then he tied his long black hair into a ponytail. Judith stepped away, out of his reach. She rubbed her arm where he'd grabbed her. "What is going on with you? You rarely hurt me unless I ask you to." Mulk grinned at the memories. Judith was insatiable, and she was smart. She knew something was bothering him, yet he didn't want to talk about it. Yes, Whip's power was troubling. Mulk had faced other young, energetic dragonlings before, and had come out victorious. This felt different. It reeked faintly of destiny, of magic, of old curses come home to roost. 20 years earlier, Mulk had smashed the Dracarys clan, killing them all. Such power threatened him and his primacy, though Stefan Dracarys had insisted that he had no ambitions of a primacy of his own. Mulk hadn't believed him. For 2 decades, he'd slept well knowing Dracarys was safe and sound, out of the way, rotting away in his grave. And once Whip was dead, Mulk would return to nights of peaceful slumber surrounded by his escort. "Talk to me," Judith pleaded. Mulk shook his head. "It is nothing." She sighed, shrugged. "Fine, have it your way. I've placed calls to all our vassals across the world. If today doesn't go like we planned, we will need to reevaluate, regroup, and then plan a counterattack." "This will be over today," Mulk insisted, curling one hand into a tight fist. He walked down the street, crossed at a light, and didn't look back to check on Judith. He knew she would be there, following him, like she always did. 100 years of war and sex had removed all of their doubts about each other. Unlike that bitch who had left him. Mouse. That pissed him off. It was bad enough that Whip had attacked his eyrie and killed any number of his vassals, but to also run off with one of Mulk's wives? That had been the final insult. That was unacceptable. Completely unacceptable. To add more salt to his wounds, Whip had also stolen Arya Cat right before Mulk was to marry her. He'd been looking forward to breaking in a new, young, fresh wife. Arya was ripe for a good fucking from a true dragon soul. Most likely she was regretting her decision while Whip fumbled at her body. Mulk walked to a skyscraper across from the Antlers Hotel and strutted up to the security desk. Judith walked up next to him. Only one security guard was on duty, some fat, middle-aged man with a receding hairline and pale skin. His uniform was the cheapest polyester. Mulk, on the other hand, was wearing a suit which would have been half a year's salary for this poor bastard. Judith's dress could take care of the other half. Both were clearly rich and powerful. And the security guard knew it. He stuttered, hey, I'm going to need you to sign in." Mulk waved a hand and whispered, "Magica Defensio." Mind wipe abilities fell under the Magica Defensio spell set. The Dragon Soul Prime of the Great Plains Primacy felt a small bit of animus leave him. He hated magic. It unnerved him. Mulk had been created for battle and flight, not to murmur words or write silly inscriptions. The guard's eyes went blank and his mouth fell slack. On the elevator ride up, he turned to Judith. "After we slaughter Whip and his escort, I plan on finding the Yellow Ronin and removing him from this world."
"Liam Strider did provide us with valuable information," Judith pointed out, one eyebrow cocked. "He told us where Whip's areas were and provided us with intel on his abilities."
Mulk shrugged. "He failed us, and you know I don't trust Ronins. Years ago I offered that yellow bastard a chance to become my vassal. He laughed at me. Laughed. I thrashed him within an inch of his life. I should have taken his life instead. Strider can't be trusted."
"The Ronins should all be killed,"
Judith agreed. "There have been purges in the past," Mulk said easily. "But now, supposedly, we live in more civilized times." Civilized. He smirked. "It means we should embrace our weakness. When I grow my power more, darling Judith, when I own all of the American primacies, there will be changes." "I want that as much as you do," Judith said. "But first, the business of the day." The elevator dinged open and they walked through an empty office space on the top floor of the skyscraper. Some cubicle walls were partially set up, but most were stacked in the corners. Bare wire covered the walls. The penthouse suites of the Antlers Hotel lay across from them. Mulk shrugged off his coat and loosened his tie with practiced ease. Judith let her dress fall from her to pool around her feet. In seconds they were naked, standing on the industrial gray carpet. They had to strip, lest their clothes be ripped to shreds when they transformed into dragons. He leered at his wife and noted her finer characteristics. Her beautiful face framed by her silver hair, the muscles of her shoulders, her pink-nippled breasts rising from a flat belly that ended in a dark patch of hair between her legs, her hips, her thighs, down to her feet. He'd used a bit of animus getting past the security guard. No one was around. He could take her right here and top off his supply of the mystical energy. Judith's eyes locked with his. "I know that look in your eye. It's 10 a.m., and your escort is in position and waiting for your signal." He walked around her, admiring the curve of her ass and the dimples on her back above her butt. She was perfection. Any man would kill to be with her, and Mulk could have her as much as he wanted, as often as he wanted. Mulk moved closer, one hand on her muscular stomach and the other cupping a supple breast. He bit her ear. Hard. She gasped. "Let them wait." Mulk growled and pushed her forward. She gripped a cubicle wall and spread her legs. With how good she was looking, it might take a while. He wanted to enjoy her before he killed the whip boy. He'd had his coffee, and now he'd get his sex before battle. Chapter 2. Stephen Whip, now Stephen Dracarys, looked over at the clock next to his bed. It was 10 a.m. and he was the first one up. Tessa lay on one side of him and Arya was sprawled on the other. For 10 straight mornings, he'd woken up with them in his bed, keeping him warm. That wasn't the best part, though. The best part was turning over in the middle of the night to find Arya or Tessa awake. They'd share a kiss, a caress, before going back to sleep. There was so much warmth and love in their big bed. It had been the best 10 days of his life, without a doubt. He'd quit his 3 jobs and dropped out of school. Tessa had also resigned from her job at the Coffee Clutch. Despite not working, they had money to spare and enough food to last months. Their days were filled with sex, training, and studying the Dracarys grimoire. Stephen loved how much money they had. He had grown up worrying over every little penny. Now, he had no idea what anything cost. Arya's credit card had been cut off since she hadn't married Rehagan Mulk, but they had sold the mint-condition Corvette Stingray for $50,000, and Arya had contacts that could move some of the priceless artwork he now owned. He'd been right back when he first saw the paintings in the Colorado Springs area. He did own several Rembrandts and a few Van Goghs. Being the last scion of the Dracarys family certainly had its benefits. Stephen and his escort, now including Mouse, went back and forth between the Lookout Mountain area with its view of the city lights and the Colorado Springs area, where the penthouse suite offered them an unfettered view of the Rocky Mountains, including Pikes Peak. The Lookout Mountain apartment was a modern apartment built into the rock of the mountain, complete with a hidden garage full of expensive cars and sacred caves filled with pools from underground hot springs. The Colorado Springs area, nestled on a secret penthouse floor in the plush Antlers Hotel, on the other hand, was classic luxury, with polished wood paneling, luxurious couches, and miles of bookcases. Even though both places were gorgeous and comfortable, Mouse never stopped pacing, fretting, and drinking. Her real name was Melissa Cragor, and she was one of the daughters of the former Rocky Mountain Primacy's prime. She'd married Mulk to cement ties between the two primes before her parents were killed. Brutally. Mouse would sometimes look at Stephen for a long time, but when he caught her, she would immediately run to another room. He wasn't about to pressure her to do anything. Even though she'd said she wanted to be a part of his escort, she hadn't made any kind of move to be romantic with him. Worse yet, Arya had no idea why Mouse was acting like she was. She'd severed her ties to Mulk, that much was clear. There was no going back. Not for her. So Mouse would drink and spend most of the time alone, and when she was around, she had a sarcastic mouth that could cut diamonds. Stephen didn't know what to do about Mouse, but he didn't want to worry about her on such a fine morning. He relaxed back into his pillow. They could sleep until noon if they wanted. They had no plans, and it was pretty clear that Rehagan Mulk didn't know where they were. The Aeries were secret. Edgar Vale had attacked them at the St. Vrain Eyrie, but then that made sense. It was where Mulk had ambushed and killed Stephen's real father. Like most mornings, Stephen had a bad case of morning wood. He glanced over at Tessa. The covers had fallen down to reveal the pale skin of her glorious full chest. She was a goth kind of girl, creamy skin, dyed black hair, partially shaved, hazel eyes, tattoos, and piercings. While she was a little short and thick, Arya was the opposite. Arya was sleeping on her side, so Stephen could study her face. Model perfect. She was from Mumbai, India, but now that she'd disobeyed her father, she was with Stephen for good. Her long black hair tumbled in waves over the white of the pillow. Her scent was cinnamon spice, and he liked her human smell just as much as her dragon smell. Arya was tall, with a smaller chest and hips than Tessa. Stephen loved how different they were, and he showed them his appreciation as often as he could, which was at least 5 times a day. Every time they had sex, it gave animus to them all. Stephen wondered what it would be like to be with Mouse, who was tiny and blonde with striking green eyes. The thought of Mouse in bed with them made his morning problem get even more problematic. Lying on his back, he pulled the covers up to his chin. No, he was going to go back to sleep. That was the end of it. He'd made up his mind. His Johnson, however, had other ideas. He felt a hand drifted through covers to caress his stiff member. He wasn't sure who it was, since both women seemed asleep. For a minute he thought it might be Mouse, but no, she was in her own room and he would have heard her come in. The mysterious hand stroked him up and down, and he felt his hips rise off the bed. Tessa then kissed his shoulder. So she was the culprit. Arya was still sleeping. Or was she? Another hand joined in the fun. Arya lifted herself onto an arm to kiss his lips. Then she pushed the bedding down to leave a trail of kisses from his chin down his chest until she took him into her mouth. Tessa shoved the comforter completely out of the way. None of them said a word. Tessa took over French kissing his mouth, and Stephen felt himself teetering on the brink. It didn't get any easier maintaining control when Tessa offered him one of her large breasts. He sucked on her while Arya sucked on him. Then she got excited. The former barista rose and lowered herself onto his face. It was oral sex heaven until Tessa shuddered in pleasure. She glowed as she orgasmed. Her bliss triggered his own. While the pleasure was intense, he also felt animus fill him like a drug. It was a hot feeling in his chest, and he remembered those first days after Arya had awakened his power. It had felt like he'd been walking around with lungs full of hot lava. That had been the animus. Now he'd grown accustomed to it, and even looked forward to the heat he felt when he either killed an enemy or had sex. Like Tessa, he also lit up when the animus charged up his cells. After Stephen and Tessa enjoyed their climaxes, Arya lay on her back for her turn. Ever eager and adventurous, Tessa gave Arya an orgasm that left the Indian woman glowing and moaning, a light sheen of perspiration coating her chest. They tumbled together in a pile of sweating bodies. Both of the women fell back asleep. Stephen, however, slipped out of bed. After throwing on sweats and a t-shirt, he padded silently across the warm floor and into the hallway. That was where he found Mouse, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, her face a thunderhead. She was wearing a black nightgown that contrasted sharply against her blonde hair and pale, unblemished skin. Her hair was pulled back into a ponytail. "Did you have fun?" she asked in a hushed voice. Stephen felt himself blush. "You heard. We tried to be quiet." "You were quiet, but my hearing is good. Really good," Mouse said, rolling her eyes. "Comes with being a fucking dragon." "Guess I haven't leveled that high yet," Stephen said sheepishly. "My hearing is pretty normal at this stage." "For now," she murmured. "The powers come slowly, but I'd trade them all to be human." That surprised Stephen. "Why?" "Less rules for humans, less family bullshit to deal with. You get to marry who you want." Mouse started past him as she slowly shook her head. He stopped her with a gentle hand. He noticed her scratching her ring finger with her thumb. That was where her wedding ring had been. Stephen, with a little help, had pulled it off her finger. The ring had turned to dust. She was free of Mulk, and yet it was clear that she still had a lot to deal with. "Humans have rules, Mouse," Stephen said. "Marriage and divorce is hard on humans, too." He knew about that firsthand. His father had abandoned him and his mother. If only Joe Whip had followed the rules. Mouse shrugged. She seemed sober, and for once she wasn't drinking wine. Her eyes fell on his face. "So, are you going to kick me out since I'm not sleeping with you?" Stephen made a face. "Fuck no. Look, 2 weeks ago I barely kissed a girl, and now I have 2 girlfriends who are basically wives. That's enough for me. But, Mouse, I've seen you look at me. I'm thinking you're as attracted to me as I am to you." She sighed. "That's just it. That's how it works. I'm drawn to you because of your power and because, well, you're not just cute, you're also sweet. That makes it harder. Don't you see that?" "I don't," Stephen said. "If you think I'm cute and sweet, then what's the problem?" "Everything," Mouse said loudly. "If I let myself actually care for you, when Mulk comes, if he kills you, then it will hurt. It'll hurt far more than when I had to marry that fucker in the first place." The minute the words were out, her jaws clenched and tears shone in her eyes. Stephen took her hand. "We both know Mulk is going to come at us, but for now we're safe. Or at least I think we are. Once we get more training, we'll go on the offensive. Mouse, I'm going to protect you. When I freed you, I promised you that, and I stand by my promises." Mouse stared at their entwined fingers. She lifted their hands and held his to her cheek. "I know you want to protect me. I know you want to be a good guy. But you don't know the power that Mulk has. He has a dozen wives in his escort, and most of them are high-level dragon souls. He also has hundreds of vassals. 3 of them are the worst. He calls them his terror trio. They're human, kind of. After years of collecting animus, they're now more like monsters. You met one of them in the Denver area, the warling Kai Sharon. He escaped because he's a smart fucker." "Tell me about the other 2 in the trio," Stephen said. "The magician is Gideon Scaramanga, and he's like old-school scary. I couldn't stand to be in the same room with him. All he cares about is power, and he's done unspeakable things to get it. He doesn't like sex. He kills to get animus. Kills, tortures, whatever, whoever." She shuddered again. "And the 3rd? Stephen asked. She nodded. "Rounding out the fearsome threesome is Carlos Butcher, a morphling who can change shape at will, but he likes being a werebore the most. Huge, awful, long tusks. He sometimes puts poison on them." Stephen nodded. "So a warling, a magician, and a morphling." He'd read in the Dracarys grimoire that some humans could channel animus to unlock magical skills. Tessa was an example of that. She was casting spells now, a low-level magician, but every day she gained more power. Mouse dropped his hand and pushed him back. If the Terror Trio shows up on our doorstep, we're fucked. We won't survive. They'll kill you, and I'll be taken back to Mulk. She shuddered. And Judith. Stephen had heard how sadistic Mulk and his oldest wife were. Mouse hadn't told them everything, but she had admitted a little of what those sick assholes had done to her. Mouse, you forget, I'm also powerful. That's why Mulk wants me dead. Well, he underestimated me, just like how you're doubting me now. And not just me, but Tessa and Arya as well. We're tough and we're smart. If someone would have told you that 2 low-level dragon souls with a novice magician could storm into Mulk's Denver Eyrie and take out one of his main vassals, what would you have said? I wouldn't have bet on you, Mouse admitted. I couldn't quite believe it, and I was there. When I squared off with Arya, I figured she was toast. Yeah, and look what happened. Stephen waited for her to respond. Realization slowly crept across her face. Or was that acceptance? A single tear dropped down her cheek. She crossed the distance between them and held Stephen to her trembling body. I get so scared, Stephen. The fear is so sharp. It cuts me. It cuts me every single minute of every single day. Stephen had his own doubts, and he knew Mouse needed to hear a little about them. I get scared too, Mouse. We'd be stupid if we weren't afraid. But I also know that I'm not your typical dragon soul. Neither was my father. You know Mulk murdered the Dracarys clan because of our power. I have that power running through my veins. And when I get scared, I think of that. And I think about the shitty things Mulk has done. Then I get mad. I'm going to make him pay. Count on it. Revenge is a good motivation, Mouse said. She pushed her face into his chest. I can get on board with that. I'll try to fight the fear, Stephen. Or maybe I can... Her voice fell away. She remained quiet while he held her. Maybe you can do what? Stephen asked. Maybe I can do some shit to help, but I don't want to talk about that with you. Not yet. Holding her, smelling her almond smell, Stephen couldn't help but get excited again. Mouse felt it. Easy there, big boy. I'm definitely not ready for that, but I'm close. Do you know why I was out here in the hallway? Tell me, Stephen said. I heard you guys having sex, Mouse replied with a sigh. I thought about going in there to join you, but then I had memories of Mulk and Judith. When you and I finally do get together, Stephen, it has to be on my terms, and it has to be just us. Is that okay? Stephen chuckled. Mouse, I wouldn't want it any other way. I'm just glad to see you not drinking. Another trembling sigh quaked through her body. Yeah, about that. I'm going to lay off the booze for a bit, if I can. I had to drink when I was married to that abusive bastard, but now I don't need it. Or at least I don't want to need it. I'm glad to hear. An explosion ripped through the place, shattering windows, flinging shrapnel, and cutting off his words like a knife blade. Stephen had never been more ready for a fight. He was going to show Mouse that she hadn't made a mistake by joining him. He was going to protect her, and if it was Mulk, he was going to kill him. Scorched fucking earth. When Arya had first offered Stephen a life as a dragon soul, she'd told Stephen that a dragon soul's life was sex and violence, love and battle. The sex was over. Time for the violence to begin. Chapter 3. Tessa jerked awake at the sound of the ferocious explosion and the ring of battle floating through the air. Arya was up, already transformed into her Homo Draconis form. Half-dragon and half-human, sleek and scaled, Arya slid through the doorway and out into the living room like the deadly predator she was. Tessa, though, wasn't about to run out there naked. She fished a dress off the hardwood floor and flung it on. In a flash, she strapped on her holsters, 2 of them, with leather straps for her thighs. She'd had to put a few extra notches in the straps because she wasn't the size of a twig-thin man, but a woman with thick thighs. She didn't have time to cinch them, and so they dangled against her bare skin. She liked the weight of the big Colt Peacekeepers, 19th century pistols that had been enchanted to hurt dragon souls. Runes had been etched into the silver barrels, but the secret was the bullets. They were what did the killing, after all. Having leather and buckles against her skin wasn't anything new to her. Though she was young, she'd had her fair share of experiences in the kink community. She shouldered on the leather satchel that held their most prized possessions, the Dracarys grimoire and the topaz pen. Stephen was a sweetie, a real college student even, but when it came to studying magic, she'd left him in the dust ages ago. Every spare moment she had was spent reading that book. Unlike her entire experience with school, 12 years of public education, she couldn't get enough. She loved studying magic as much as she liked coffee, and for a professional barista, that was saying something. Before bolting out into the living room of the Lookout Mountain Eyrie, she went to the window. The sun was shining down through the pine trees. The highway below was clear of people. She wasn't sure who was attacking them. It didn't matter. She was going to do her part. Was this really her life? It felt unbelievable. Not 2 weeks before, she'd been working a dead-end job at the Coffee Clutch, wondering what she was doing with her life and why she felt special. 2 weeks ago, she hadn't been very special, and despite her love of sex and her open mind, there was nothing very unique about her. Now, she was a magician, in love with 2 dragons and readying herself for battle. A green streak broke from the trees, a serpentine body 15 feet long with wings the color of moss and a reptilian face. No beard. It wasn't a male dragon soul. The female filled her wings with wind, paused, and then opened her fanged maw to unleash a sparking arc of lightning. This dragon soul was using her electro-arc exhalant. The energy struck the windows and they blasted inward, sparkling shards flying in a sheet. At the last second, Tessa made a hand gesture, as familiar now as grinding coffee beans, and then she shouted, "Magica Defensio!" The shattering glass struck her pink shield spell, the sharp debris creating rose-colored slashes in the air. She was safe from the glass, but not from the dragon. The emerald creature latched onto the window frame with her front claws, each one the size of a bratwurst. Her vertically slitted eyes locked onto Tessa. She lunged forward, jaws wide, ready to snap Tessa in half. Instead, her head flew back in an explosion of pink. Thank you, shield spell. Tessa snatched a pistol out of a holster. She slowed her breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth, and fired on the exhale as the muzzle dropped onto her target. Arya was surprisingly competent with a gun, and she'd taught Tessa the basics. The pistol kicked in her hand, the muzzle belching out bright green fire. A hole bloomed in the side of the dragon soul's neck. The female shrieked, hurled herself away from the window, and went soaring off over the trees, readying for another attack. Tessa whirled and sped from the room and into the nightmare of battle. A dozen mercenaries in modern warfare battle gear filled the room, and the ropes they'd rappelled down dangled outside the windows. She thought of the countless hours she'd spent playing Call of Duty. These guys were covered in matte black Kevlar and wielded sleek automatic M4s, like NPCs sent in as support. The mercs weren't the problem, though. Stephen and Arya could handle them without breaking a sweat, like so many times before. No, what worried Tessa were the 3 men with them. These jokers had so much animus she could almost smell it. They weren't dragon souls, though. They were something else. One she recognized, Kai Sharon, one of Mulk's warlings. He was medium height with a shaved head, a slight beard, and sharp features. Garish in his purple suit, he wielded a glowing katana in one hand and a beefy .45 in the other. On Sharon's left stood a dark-skinned spark plug of a man with a huge beard falling down his barrel chest. He wore a West African dashiki shirt and cut-off denim shorts. On his feet were thick sandals that looked Guatemalan. Tessa had an appreciation for Central American footwear. On the warling's right was a tall, gaunt man, almost colorless, he was so pale. Greasy, long, white hair swept down from his head, though he was balding. He was a repugnant person with humorless eyes, hollow cheeks, and slim lips. Dirt smudged his face, and his fingers were black with grime. A stained dress shirt hung off his skeletal frame, and his pants were slashed and gashed. He looked like a homeless person in need of meds, a bed, and a hot meal. The three had already taken down Arya and Stephen, both in their Homo Draconis forms. The two were on the floor, writhing in pain as bloody red chains of bright, sizzling light bound their serpentine limbs together. Mouse still stood, barely, and she held the gleaming slayer blade in a defensive stance. When Tessa burst into the room, all eyes turned on her. She did a little math. Stephen's force, 4 in all, were up against at least 16 attackers, which included a dragon soul, 3 ultra-tough assassins, and 12 humans armed to the teeth. Well, she had 11 bullets. Time to start evening the odds. Instead of drawing the left Colt, she hefted her right Peacekeeper with 2 hands, the grip resting on her palm. It was double action, so squeezing the trigger pulled the hammer back and sent a bullet flying at the tallest of the trio, the skeletal homeless guy. Their magician, if Tessa had to bet. He raised a hand and spat out, "Magica Defensio." There was a flare of crimson and her bullet whined off his shield. The shield was made of the same bloody red light that had Arya and Stephen pinned down, but when the magician was forced to cast a spell to save his skin, it broke his other spell. Stephen and Arya were free, but they were slow to get up. That binding spell must have hurt. Stephen teetered up first. At the same time, all 12 mercenaries turned their compact M4s on Tessa. The noise of the gunfire slammed into her eardrums. Gun smoke misted the air, filled with the stench of gunpowder. Her shield spell was still up, and those bullets created explosions of pink in front of her. Their bullets weren't going to do shit to her. She still had 4 bullets to distribute. She aimed and fired, slow and steady, picking each shot. Before her dad died, he'd taken her to the shooting range, so she knew how to hit a target, and with Arya's extra training, she was spot on. And after playing Left 4 Dead in her formative years, she knew how to focus on headshots. Pow, 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 pow. 4 of the mercenaries dropped with big holes in their skulls. Tessa felt animus fill her, their spiritual energy powering her. Good. She'd need to cast a buttload of spells before this was over. "Butcher, take out the bitch with the gun," the gaunt magician snarled. "Sharon, will you please chop up these 2 into dragon meat?" The squat, dark-skinned man grew 4 times bigger even as his body changed. His hands solidified into hooves, his clothes and skin transformed into pink skin with dark, bristling hair. Watching all that was horrible, but even worse was what happened to his face. Tusks, 3 feet long, ripped out of his mouth. His nose cracked out of his skull, becoming a snout dripping mucus. His eyes shrank until they were red dots, deeply recessed in his pig's face. The barnyard stench of him struck her nose. A wet animal smell. A wereboar. A big one. Butcher squealed and thundered through the couch, coming for Tessa. "Oh, fuck that action," she hissed. She holstered her right gun, drew her left, and took hold of it with both hands. Meanwhile, Sharon blurred forward, raising his katana, ready to chop Stephen's head from his neck. Before his blade could come down, though, Mouse was there, moving like the wind, given living form, easily matching Sharon step for step. They were both using Serpent Grace, one of the many abilities from the Pugna side of the skill tree. Mouse caught the descending sword on the Slayer blade. With a grunt, she drove a foot into the warling's gut, doubling him over as he wheezed for breath. That kind of raw power could only mean one thing. She'd charged up the blow with the dragon strength ability. Mouse shot straight in and brought her broadsword screaming down onto his back, but it bounced off, thanks to his dark armor skill. The newest addition to Stephen's escort had her work cut out for her. The warling was strong and well-trained. But Tessa couldn't think about that, not now. She had worries of her own, namely a pissed-off wereboar. Her shield spell snapped off, so she cast another one. Just in time. She angled the pink force field to protect herself from Butcher the Demon Pig. But that dick was smart. He flung himself to the side, knocked against the shield with his flank, and then charged around. Hooves clattered across the stone floor as the boar outmaneuvered her shield and charged inside her guard. A yellow tusk knocked her pistol out of her hand, and it went spinning away. Tessa clenched a fist and pulled her shield inward, sideswiping the beefy boar and sending him onto his side for a second. She dashed for her fallen gun, but suddenly found herself facing 3 Kevlar-clad mercenaries. 2 took aim at her with their rifles, while another snapped open a battle baton that glowed a sickly green color. He feinted left, then shot in right. Baton ready to smack her across the face. Who knew what that magic stick would do to her? Luckily, she never had to find out. Arya was finally up and fighting. From out of her dragon's mouth, she exhaled a spout of crimson flame that engulfed the 3 men. They cooked in their armor, flailing about, shrieking, screaming, crying. Arya had expertly guided her breath away from Tessa to only focus on the mercenaries. Over half of their human enemies had been killed. Only 5 of the mercenaries remained. But then the magician shouted, "Magica impetum!" Red bolts of energy sizzled into Arya, making her howl in agony. Those missiles shimmered and changed, transforming into crimson chains of arcane power. In an instant, Arya was on the floor, writhing in agony, taken out of the fight once more. The green dragon returned. Bad timing. The front windows of the living room showed nothing but green scales and bright yellow eyes. That mouth opened. Nothing good could come from that. Tessa dove to the floor, came up with her pistol, and put another hole in the green worm. It shrieked and ducked away. She turned and fired at the oncoming boar. The morphling was good. He dodged to the side to avoid the bullet, but that also gave her an out. She sped past him. Or tried to. The war pig adjusted course at the last minute and lashed out with his back feet, kicking her legs out from under her. She went sprawling, hitting the ground like a bag of bricks. Her legs screamed in pain, bright jags of white dancing across her vision. It might not be broken, but it was pretty fucked up regardless. Mouse and the warling continued to fence across the battlefield, parrying each other's attacks in loud clashes of ringing steel. Every attack and dodge was imbued with mystic energy. "Tessa!" Stephen called out. "Grab Arya and get out of here. Mouse, you need to go too. I can handle all of these fuckers." She turned to see Stephen crush a merc's skull with his tail. He twirled like a top, ducking low as he lashed out with deadly ebony talons, carving through another's belly. The Kevlar armor might have been able to stop incoming rounds, but it wasn't made to withstand a force of nature like Stephen. Kevlar parted and strands of gray gut slipped free, along with a sheet of slick gore. "You are out of your mind if you think I'm leaving," Mouse returned, parrying a slashing blow before dancing left, then diving forward, thrusting the Slayer blade toward the warling. Tessa agreed with Mouse. No way would they abandon Stephen. Another human with a green baton shot in from Stephen's flank and landed a solid blow. The baton seemed to hit like a Mack truck, and it brought along a surge of primal power with it. Some sort of electrical attack, not so different from a taser. Stephen went rigid, shaking in his Homo Draconis form until he managed to shake off the stunning blow. Clearly, the dude thought he delivered a killing blow. He was wrong. Dead wrong. The merc's eyes widened, his mouth dropping open. Stephen growled, "Magica Defensio!" The next merc to attack was repulsed by Stephen's shadowy shield spell, but Stephen didn't stop there. He thrust both hands forward, palms up, and pressed the remaining humans against the wall until their screams stopped. He crushed them to death. Blood oozed out of their armor, and their skulls exploded in a rain of brains and bone that oozed down the face of the shimmering shield spell. Stephen whipped the force field around, the air in front of him covered in gore. "Magica impetum!" the magician called out. The red energy from the creepy fucker turned into 3 spinning swords in mid-air. Each sword struck Stephen's shield and went right through. The 3 blades sliced through his scales and sent him down to his knees. His tail shuddered from the attack, and he slumped over. Was he dead? No, he couldn't be. Never. No. But why didn't Stephen's shield spell stop the magic swords? No clue. But Tessa knew they had to run. They might have taken out the cannon fodder, but the 3 vassals and that green dragon outside were more than enough to kill them all. The wereboar stomped down on Arya, adding to her suffering, before wheeling around. He bounded across the broken furniture and smoldering bodies. Again he raced toward Tessa. He lowered his head. He was going to impale her on one of those spear-like tusks. If at first you don't succeed, try and try again. She couldn't worry about the persistent boar, though. She had to help her friends. "Magica Cura!" she yelled, flicking her free hand forward, trying out the next-level spell. Her chest grew arctic cold as Animus left her in a rush of power. Pink flashes of light erupted from her hands only to slam into Stephen, healing him. She felt her own energy falter, but the spell worked wonders, since Stephen was back on his feet a few seconds later and hardly looking worse for the wear. He swayed for a moment, his eyes hazy and confused, but then he shook off whatever funk he'd been in and called out, "Magica Defensio!" once more. The wereboar thundered into the black shield and bounced away as though he'd run headlong into a brick wall. Butcher adjusted course quickly, though, wheeling about and lunging for Mouse, who'd gotten just a little too close for her own good. Tessa thought she was safe for a minute, but then the green dragon returned. This time the female dragon soul was ready to hit with her exhalant attack right away. Fire raged into the room in a searing line of liquid flame. She was aiming for Tessa. A little payback for being shot by her, no doubt. Tessa closed her eyes. Nothing could save her. Except for Stephen's shield. But again the spell failed. Tessa skittered to the side, but her wounded leg caught the blast, frying in the unbearable heat of the dragon soul's inferno exhalant. She screamed as her mind threatened to snap from the pain. How could that hurt so much? How could anything hurt that much? "You fuckers need to be leaving. Right now!" Mouse howled. She grew from human form straight to her true form, an amber-colored dragon, smelling like sweet almonds in a hot oven. Her sheer size filled the room, blocking the green dragon's attack. She drove a claw into the wereboar's head, pinning him to the floor. The warling in the purple suit was thrown backward, and the awful gaunt magician was eclipsed by her size. Tessa tried to stand, but her leg failed her. Stephen, though, picked her up with ease. His tail shot out, slithering around Arya, pulling her across the floor until the magical red chains flickered off. Arya morphed back into a human, naked, raked with wounds. She was unconscious. They needed her awake to flee. "Magica Cura," Tessa wept, lifting one hand which trembled like a leaf in a strong breeze. "Please cure her. Arya, please." The cold froze her chest once more, even while the burns on her leg howled as if they hated her for healing Arya and not them. Animus seeped away, and gashes on Arya's skin closed, flesh knitting itself with supernatural speed. She cracked her eyes and sat up, alert and ready for more ass-kicking. Mouse cried out in agony. Then she roared some more. She kept the pig on the ground, but that left the green dragon, the magician, and Kai Sharon there to hurt her, slicing, blasting, and biting at her huge body, which easily filled most of the room. "We have to help her," Tessa wailed. How could things turn to shit so fast? What had happened to them? Mulk. That was the answer. He'd sent in his best. "We can't," Stephen whispered bitterly. He'd returned to his naked human form, a big chunk of his animus gone. Mouse roared again, exhaling fire. All around her, brilliant orange flames engulfed the bodies of the mercenaries and the other creatures attacking her. Ammunition in the assault rifles went off, then another explosion rumbled through the annihilated area, this one tremendously loud. Maybe a grenade, maybe something else. By that time, Tessa, held by both Stephen and Arya, had been carried through the glass doors and into the garage. Stephen tucked her into the back seat of the orange Ford Bronco. Another earth-shaking explosion followed. Definitely a grenade, she decided, and a hefty chunk of the roof fell. The piece of ceiling, easily half a ton of stone, landed squarely on the nearby Dodge Charger. Metal twisted and glass shattered as the car met its untimely end. Stephen jumped into the cab and slammed the door with a grunt. Arya was beside him, riding shotgun. He gunned the engine and spun the Bronco around, tires squealing murder as yet another explosion rocked the mountain. Flames from the fight inside reached the BMW Roadster, and its gas tank ignited. The car was lifted up into the air, consumed by a ball of fiery destruction. Tessa glanced at Stephen. He had laser focus as he drove the Bronco down across the pavement, making for the exit. But he misjudged the distance and metal shrieked across rock. They bounced over something, probably more debris from the crumbling ceiling, and then went speeding out of the secret entrance and onto the highway. Sunlight and trees greeted them, unperturbed by the battle within. Stephen floored it. The tires whined on the pavement as they rocketed forward. Tessa smelled limes and tequila. Unmistakable. What the hell? Were they being attacked by a margarita machine? No. It was that damn green dragon. The female swooped down from the sky, huge wings outstretched. Tessa could see its emerald scales through the back window. Then the dragon's awful face leered in on them. She opened her fanged maw. "Fuck that bitch," Tessa hissed. Colt Peacekeeper up, she fired and blew out the back window. Then she unloaded the pistol into the face of the green dragon. Shot after shot blew through the scales until a bullet found the female's brain. She struck the highway behind them, a big pile of dead dragon meat, which quickly reverted back to her human form. Female, naked, dead. Tessa closed her eyes, feeling animus flow into her, warming her, but it wasn't enough to keep her conscious. Her last thought? Mouse. They'd lost Mouse. The brave dragon soul had sacrificed herself so they could get away. Chapter 4. Mulk stormed around the hidden floor of the Antlers Hotel in downtown Colorado Springs. In his Homo Draconis form, he clashed through priceless art, scorched ancient books with a gout of fire, and crushed the big dining table into kindling. He scratched gashes into the hardwood floor and ripped apart the starbursts of cherry wood set into the boards. Those damned starbursts were in the shape of that insipid Draco constellation that Stefan Dracaris adored so much. Judith, arms slung across her naked chest, watched him. So did a half-dozen other women, all part of his escort, and all accustomed to his storms of rage. Mulk shifted back to being human and ran a hand through his hair, slicking it back. "I am going to find, kill, and eat Liam Strider. That yellow motherfucker. He said Whip would be here. He said this was their main area." Judith shook her head. "Yes, he thought this was their main area, but then he mentioned the Lookout Mountain area as well." "Yes, damn it, I know, but we could have ended this here, now. And the Terror Trio are a bunch of worthless assholes. They didn't fucking do their fucking job. We lost Lana as well. Those goddamn cult peacekeepers." Mulk stormed up to Judith. Her beauty soothed him. He glanced over to the other women of different sizes, colors, and shapes. Rebecca, Denise, Hatsumi, Ashanta, Mary, and Sabina. "You commissioned those pistols 100 years ago," Judith reminded him. "You used to love them. I was surprised you left them with Edgar Vale." Mulk ground his teeth together. "I'll get the Colts back, and I will replace Lana. We will remember her and honor her memory."
Judith shrugged. Lana was never our best asset anyway. Not on the battlefield, Mulk conceded. But in the bedroom she did have her talents. He turned to address his escort. Sabina, read the room. Let's see if we can find something out about this upstart shithead. Sabina, a short Mexican woman, straightened. She wasn't a dragon soul, but a magician who had progressed far on the Veneficium branch of the skill tree. She raised her hands and whispered, Magica divinatio. Her eyes flared a deep lavender, glowing with otherworldly light. A mist of purple energy surrounded her outstretched hands. Not a second later, she cried out, No, it's impossible. Please, no. She sank to her knees, hands suddenly clutched to her chest. What now? Mulk thundered. The rest of his escort clustered around the woman, all trying to soothe her. All the women except for Judith. He knows, Sabina cried. The dead, doorways, we must leave. Him, the man, the dragon soul, a trap for us. Above Sabina, a shadowy circle formed, 3 feet across, rough and smoky around its edges. She looked up, and a drip of something red splashed down on her face. Not on her face. Into her eyes. A drop in each one. She screeched. The other female dragon souls pulled Sabina away. A torrent of molten red poured out of the black portal, hitting the floor with a sizzling splash. The flames started immediately. Other portals opened up, and more of the impossibly hot liquid gushed down. Lava, Judith said. It's portal magic, bringing lava in. We have to get out. She clenched her jaw. Now, she finished coldly. The lava quickly ate through the hardwood floor, but then pooled there to cool. The magma wasn't dropping down into the rooms below. Whoever had set the trap must have cast a spell to keep the molten rock inside the suite. Mulk darted forward, scooped up Sabina in his arms, and wheeled. He took 3 long steps and shifted into his Homo Draconis form until he got to the landing on the east side of the Eyrie. He heard Judith cast a hide spell, Magica Defensio, so the humans wouldn't see them. How the monkeys would explain the molten rock in the hidden floor of the hotel, he didn't know. Not his problem at the end of the day. In seconds, the vast suite was lost in flame and hardening magma. Mulk, flanked by the rest of his escort, all dragons now, flew to the office building across the way, where his clothes waited. Judith carried the inert Sabina in her claws, her gleaming eyes betraying no sign of her thoughts. Judith transformed back into her human form once she got close to the window. She walked onto the bare concrete with Sabina still cradled in her arms. All the other dragon souls followed suit, taking their cues from Judith, as she was their undisputed leader, after Mulk himself, of course. Gently, Judith laid Sabina on the floor. Sabina had lost consciousness. Instead of eyeballs, she now had hardened rock. She'd taken twin drips of magma right into her eye sockets. "Heal her," Mulk ordered. "I'll try." Judith bent, hands raised, and whispered, "Magica cura." The black slag disintegrated, and new eyes grew out of the dust. But they weren't brown. No, the healing magic had removed the pain and dealt with the stone, but it didn't grow her new eyes. Now she had orbs of solid gray. Sabina woke, blinked, and began to cry. "I can't see, Reagan. I can't see, blinded. You'll throw me away. You'll cast me out. I can't serve you. I can't." Judith kissed the woman's cheek. "Reagan will do no such thing. You're part of his escort." She paused and glanced up at him. "We are faithful." Mulk didn't like that his wife was so quick to make that decision. He liked Sabina all right, but he needed full-strength warriors in his escort, now more than ever. He wouldn't waste his time with a cripple. He dismissed her from his mind, once more turning to the problem at hand. The Eyrie had been protected by portal magic. Portal magic was forbidden, and besides, there was no way the young upstart could do such a thing on his own. So the question was, whose Eyrie was it? "Sabina," Mulk rumbled, "you mentioned a man, a dragon soul. Who were you talking about?"
I don't know, Sabina said, shaking her head. There was so much power. I saw it all so clearly, him setting up the spell, warning me, but then he wiped my mind. That area, it's protected by sorcery that I can barely comprehend. Damn it, Mulk cursed, curling one hand into a fist, nails biting into his palm. Gideon might be able to help get that information out of her, Judith said. She'd gone from soft caretaker to an unfeeling problem solver. There was a reason he liked her the most. She was as hard and utilitarian as he was. And he might be able to fix her eyes, Mulk said, if we get him enough animus, and we all know how our Gideon likes to collect. One of his escort, Hatsumi, a Japanese woman who was still soft, gasped. She was his newest addition, a marriage he'd arranged to solidify relations with Tokyo's Dragon Soul Prime. Mulk smirked. Finding people for Gideon to kill has never been a problem. What he really wanted was to feed Stephen Whip to his magician. With some luck, that would happen. Let's get our asses up to Denver, Mulk said. I want to hear firsthand from our terror trio about this Whip freak. Not 2 weeks as a dragon soul, and he managed to escape my very best. Mulk picked up his shirt, but he dropped it. On second thought, I'm still pissed, and I need to relieve a little stress. So who wants me? Every single woman, including Sabina, raised her hand. They were hardly turned on, and while he enjoyed their lust, he found their fear and obedience just as satisfying. You are all such good girls, he smirked. He'd already had Judith that day. He chose Hatsumi. Her kisses started out cold, but she soon warmed up. He was her prime, after all. Stephen blasted the Bronco's heater, but it didn't do much to keep the chill out of the vehicle, not when they were missing the back window. Still, the Bronco took them away from the Lookout Mountain area, and that was all that mattered at the moment. Stephen avoided interstates because that kind of wind would freeze his balls off. He got on Highway 93, a pretty stretch of road edged by trees and big red rocks, all under a blue sky. Arya had her arms wrapped around herself, shuddering softly. Only Tessa, sitting in the back, reloading her pistols, had clothes. Arya had checked her wounds. The burns were bad, but Arya didn't think she needed a hospital. They'd found a medical kit in the Bronco, 30 years old. The antibiotic cream would probably do nothing, but they had some sterile bandages for Tessa. They'd wrapped her wounded leg and hoped for the best. The former barista was in good spirits, if a little pale and weak. So, she said, are we going back for Mouse? We hardly have the animus for another fight, Arya murmured. She was bruised, burned, hacked, and magic missiled. She had bandages on her as well. They'd taken quite the beating. Okay, Tessa said. I'll blow you both, then we go back. Stephen chuckled at that. It hurt to breathe, and he felt as banged up as Arya looked. What was Tessa thinking? She could hardly stand. Tessa, Arya said. Mouse knew what she was doing. I doubt she could have survived that last explosion. She gave her life to save us. That whole area is wrecked. Stephen clenched his teeth and swallowed down his grief. All we can do now for Mouse is avenge her. I hate it that they caught us so unprepared, Tessa complained. Never again. I'm gonna magic up shit to warn us next time. And poor Mouse. Poor Mouse. We didn't see her die. She might still be alive. Arya didn't respond to that. Knowing her, she was already planning how to prevent another ambush in the future. We should have bought high-end security equipment. My father in Mumbai lives in a fortress. Stephen shook his head. My real father didn't need it. He had his spells. I vote we do both, magic and a high-tech security system. Overkill seems sensible these days. Besides, waking up to fight for your life puts a real damper on the day, so I'd rather avoid it if possible. Arya punched him. Her words came out angrily. And you, I heard what you said. You were going to try and fight them all yourself. Stephen, we are your escort. You are the male dragon soul that holds us together.
It is our duty to sacrifice our lives for you and not the other way around. She paused. Mouse did what any of your vassals should. I didn't think she had a heroic bone in her body, and yet, in our hour of need, she was there, her duty bravely executed. Stephen took a right and drove into Red Rocks State Park. He pulled off into a turnout. He needed a minute, and he had no idea where they were going. He took in a deep breath. How about we take a moment of silence for Mouse? They all went quiet. A bird chirped through the pine trees. Another flew onto a huge red rock formation. Noise from I-70 filtered through the stone valley where they sat. Tessa sniffed at her tears. She had such a gentle, loving spirit. Arya, though, was all strength and business. She sat stoically, staring out the window. And Stephen knew she was going through 1,000 scenarios on how to get out of the situation they were in. After a few minutes, Tessa spoke. We need to contact Mouse's parents and friends. They need to know she's gone. There are none, Arya replied. Mouse made it clear that she was alone in the world. Her father, Cornelius Cragor, was the prime of the Rocky Mountain primacy, but was killed by a young contender for the throne. Her mother died defending him. Mouse's status fell, and she lost her friends. Being an unimportant wife to Mulk destroyed her. Hence the drinking. So sad, Tessa mourned. I wish I would have been nicer to her. She was so mean, though. Agreed, Arya said. And yet she gave her life to save us. She paused, lips pursed as she surveyed the vast stretch of wilderness. That is behind us now. We need to decide what our move is, and on that, I'm not certain. They lapsed into an uncomfortable, tense silence. After a few minutes, Stephen spoke. So it seems to me we need to drive down to the Colorado Springs area, get set up there, and come up with some sort of warning system. We're also going to need to be more aggressive on selling stuff. We need money, and bad. Tessa took off her gun belt and retrieved her phone. Leave it to the barista to have holsters for her pistols and her phone on the same belt. There might be a problem there. She thumbed her phone screen and pulled up an urgent news story. I set up Google Alerts, she explained, and it seems like Mulk didn't just attack the Lookout Mountain area, he also hit the Antlers Hotel. The normal news outlets are saying it was some sort of freak fire on the top floor. The indie pages are talking about lava. She faltered, worry etched into the lines of her face. Looks like the Colorado Springs area is gone. Tessa gulped back a sob as she scrolled down on her phone. And they found an unidentified dead woman on the Lookout Mountain Road. Blonde, slender, short. That doesn't sound like the dragon soul I killed. It's Mouse. Has to be. She's gone. Really gone. Stephen felt his stomach drop into oblivion. Once again, they had nothing. The disappointment and dread he was feeling wasn't new. Growing up on the edge of poverty, he and his mom had always worried about money. Every so often, they'd come up short. Stephen would go around the neighborhood asking to do chores for people, and his mom would go to a relative for a loan. They rarely gave her anything because her husband, Joe Whip, had such a bad gambling addiction. Living so close to the edge, Stephen had always felt desperate and powerless. Money had ruled his life. He'd thought he'd taken care of that with his newfound wealth. Now, that wealth was gone, either blown to bits in the Lookout Mountain area or burned to cinders inside the Colorado Springs area. Lava. In Colorado Springs, Stephen tried to imagine what would cause that. Had Mulk destroyed it out of anger? But they said lava, not fire. Then he knew. A portal. His father must have put in a trap, a portal to an underground fissure of lava. Clever and devastating. Stephen had avoided being hit by the trap because of the topaz pendant he had, now in the form of a mystical pen which was currently attached to the Dracarys grimoire safe and sound in Tessa's satchel. Arya sighed, breaking him out of his reverie. It is always the same for our kind. It is what your father told you to do, Stephen. Gather your escort, acquire your hoard, and build your Ares.
Let nothing stop you. Hearing those words undid the knot filling Stephen's stomach. They made him want to do wonderful, terrible things. Yeah, you're right, Arya. I thought I could skip over that whole acquire your horde deal, but no, that's part of being a dragon soul. I have my escort. The beginnings of one, Arya interrupted. 2 females do not an escort make. You need at least 6. Wow, Tessa breathed. That's a whole lot of lovin'. Are you up to servicing 4 other women, Stephen? He felt himself get excited, and he smiled. Tessa, that won't be a problem. But you 2 have to know that you'll always be special to me, no matter how many wives I have. Arya took his hand in hers. I understand that. Do you, Tessa? I do, the barista-turned-magician said. But it's not like there's a limited amount of love. In fact, it's like animus. The more love there is among us and Stephen, the more powerful it becomes. I love sex and I love people, so I'm excited to see who else we meet. And if you kill Mulk, Arya added, you'll get his wives automatically. The transitions can be tricky, but when you are their prime, they will eventually want you. It's just the way it works. I'm not sure I'm on board with that. Stephen shifted uncomfortably. His naked butt cheeks were sticking to the upholstery. I want my escort to be with me of their own free will. If it's some kind of magic tying them to me, that doesn't sound like love. That sounds like Stockholm Syndrome. Yeah, that could definitely be a problem, Tessa said. But Stephen, you're so sweet and giving, and hot to boot. You're a nice package. She stopped talking for a minute to let him blush. Then she went on. I'm wondering if I could tweak the telepathic components of the mind wipe spells to lessen the effect of this prime seduction magic, or wipe it away completely. Then any new women you get can choose. Stephen groaned. This was all becoming so complicated. Wait. We don't need to worry about my escort. Let's work on the horde part. We need money, or at the very least clothes. If you want to work on spells, work on finding a way to hide us. I'm wondering if Mulk's magician has some way to track us. If he can, and if he knows who we are, Arya said, then he can go after your families. My people are back in India, but Stephen, your mother might be in danger. And Tessa, your mother, your sister, and your brother could become targets. Stephen slammed his hand into the steering wheel. Arya is right. This changes everything. We need to remove the threat. We need to strike at Mulk directly. They all fell silent. Tessa sighed. I just wish we knew more about how spells worked. For example, I thought our shield spells could protect us against any form of attack, but the magician hit Stephen through his defensive barrier, and the female dragon breathed fire on me, though in theory the force field should have protected me. Arya nodded. Magic was never my strength. Frankly, I'm as confused as you are, Tessa. Maybe my magic sucks, Stephen frowned. But I don't care. I'll kill Mulk with or without spells. It was tough talk, but right then, attacking Mulk seemed impossible. A new fear crept into Stephen, but then it changed into anger. A fury so powerful it made him want to tear out the heart of the world. He'd failed to protect Mouse. He'd broken his promise, and he couldn't stand it. One thing was certain. He wouldn't let Mulk get the best of him again. That bastard was going to pay in spades. Chapter 5. Tessa was having a hard time breathing. Red Rocks State Park was beautiful, and she had a million memories of concerts, hikes, and lazy afternoons hanging out with friends there. Yet those happy days seemed like they belonged to someone else. Her leg ached from the wereboar's attack. Luckily, it didn't feel broken, just pulverized. Her burn, though, sent screeching needles of agony through her nervous system. The physical pain was bad enough, but she also hurt emotionally. She felt awful about losing Mouse, but even worse, Mulk might be going after her family. If anything happened to her mom, her older sister, or her brother, it would destroy her. Up until now, her family had been the most important thing in her life. Her brother, Jared, was diagnosed with childhood MS when he was 5. He'd fought the disease bravely, but at 10 he'd found himself in a wheelchair. By the time he was 11, he needed constant care. She racked her brains for who to call, for someone who could help them. For some odd reason, she kept thinking back to the guy who had helped them before. Without asking Stephen and Arya, she scrolled through her contacts until she found Bud's number, then thumbed the call button. William Bud Novak had worked with her at the Coffee Clutch. He still worked there and went to the Metropolitan State University of Denver, Metro to the locals. He'd been a total douche to Stephen, but all that had changed when Stephen had changed. During their final dust-up with that psychopath Edgar Vale, Bud had helped them. Big time. Then they'd wiped his mind, so he knew nothing about the Dragon Souls, but despite that he'd proven himself valuable, reliable even. And besides, she had no one else. Not that could help with this. Bud answered. "Hey, Tessa, don't invite me to any more parties. My dental work cost a small fortune. Luckily, my dad had no problem paying for it. What's up?" Tessa winced. "Sorry about that. It was a wild party, and you said it yourself. You can be a real asshole." Bud chuckled. She could practically hear his shrug through the phone. I am who I am." "What the hell, Tessa?" Stephen hissed. She held up a finger. "Hey, Bud, we're kind of in trouble. No parties this time. Can you meet us?" "Who's us?" Bud asked. "Me, Stephen, and Arya. You remember her, right? The foreign exchange student?" Tessa couldn't believe she was calling Bud again, but her instincts were usually really good when it came to people. "Yeah, I remember." He paused. "What kind of trouble we talking about here?" Tessa wasn't sure what to say. Dragon souls and their society were a closely guarded secret for any number of reasons. She was still learning about the dragons on Earth, but she thought it had something to do with the Zotharic, evil demons in the universe. That, and the old cliches about governments researching dragons, too much PR, and the headache of the paparazzi. For whatever reason, dragon souls were required to stay hidden. The penalty was death. "Tessa," Bud asked, "are you still there?" "Yeah. As for what kind of trouble, it's not really something I can talk about. Not over the phone. But, please, Bud, it's about my family. Please, can you meet us? Please?" Bud was quiet for a long beat. Finally, he sighed. "Man, am I gonna regret this. I just know it. But fine. Whatever. I'll meet you guys. Where at?" "Coffee Clutch," she said at once. "And seriously, Bud, thank you. Oh, and bring clothes," Tessa added at the end. "For all of us. Stephen and Arya are kind of naked at the moment, and my dress is, I believe the term is battle-stained." "Yep. Seriously gonna regret this. See you guys there." The phone clicked, the line dead. Stephen had turned in the driver's seat and gave her a long stare. He was clearly mad at her. "Yes, I know," Tessa said, "but we're in trouble. The less our families know, the better. I'm a girl who goes with the flow. Bud helped us save Arya the last time we needed help, and Arya said it herself. Dragon souls have human vassals. I think we should bring Bud in. Something tells me he can really help us." "Bud is a total dick," Stephen said. "He bullied me for months on end. He's like the required asshat you see in most teen flicks. Do you really think we can trust him?" "If he betrays us, we kill him," Arya said simply. "Ouch," Tessa muttered with a grimace. Arya, while super hot and phenomenal in bed, definitely had a brutal side to her. Tessa chalked it up to growing up in the constant warfare that permeated Dragon Soul culture. Primes were constantly fighting for territory, conquering other primacies, and defending themselves from usurpers. "We're not going to kill Bud," Stephen said flatly. "Might punch him in the teeth, but I won't kill him." He dropped the Bronco into gear and cruised out of Red Rocks, heading for South Denver, Broadway, to their weird rendezvous at the Coffee Clutch. Ignoring her pain, Tessa called her mom at work. On Wednesdays, Tessa's sister, Abby, took care of Jared. According to Tessa's mom, everything was just fine, no problems, nothing sinister. When she asked for more information, Tessa kept her answers vague. She hung up and called her sister. Abby also didn't report anything suspicious. So far, so good. but she had a sinking feeling that wouldn't last indefinitely. Stephen had her call his mom next. Getting her on the phone tended to be almost impossible. Thankfully, they got lucky. Florence Whip was at her job, cleaning the Denver airport. And better yet, she was also okay. At least for now. Tessa hung up and frowned. This is awful. I'm fine fighting Mulk as long as I know our families are safe. You have taken well to battle and murder, Arya nodded, though she kept her gaze fixed on the rolling foothills outside the window. You killed those men who attacked us, and yes, you weep, but you only mourn our fallen friend. Not really murder, Tessa breathed. They were trying to kill us. We defended ourselves. It wasn't like I poisoned their soup. She thought for a second longer. But I would. This is total war with Mulk, isn't it? It is indeed, Arya said. And that's just fine with me, Stephen murmured, knuckles going white on the steering wheel as he tightened his grip. That guy already has quite the butcher's bill, and I intend to see he pays it in full. Stephen pulled into the back parking lot at the Coffee Clutch. The little restaurant was busy, and 4 out of the 5 spaces were full of cars. Subarus and SUVs, the vehicles of choice for Coloradoans. He parked. Tessa was trying to keep a brave face, but her leg obviously hurt her. She had access to the Magica Cura spells, but the healing magic only worked on other people, and unfortunately, Stephen didn't have the mojo yet to cast level 2 spells. Maybe with more study. Maybe once he leveled up a bit. Maybe. Stephen pushed the thoughts away as Bud came ambling up, walking like a proud peacock who thought he owned the world. Seriously, the guy was 6 feet of douchebag, blonde hair sculpted with product, wearing trendy jeans and a shirt that would have paid for at least 1 elective at Metro, if not 2. Instead of shoes, he wore hiking sandals. He carried a nylon bag from Whole Foods, probably clothes for Stephen and Arya. I hope he brought underwear, Stephen said. For you, maybe, Arya answered. I wouldn't want to wear someone else's undergarments. Bud walked up to the driver's side. His eyes widened. Dude, Cool Whip, you been hitting the steroids or what? You're ripped. Stephen looked down at his flat abs. It was six-pack city, and he was the mayor. He flexed a bicep. You know I'm letting you call me Cool Whip out of the goodness of my heart, don't you? Bud paled and offered him a shaky grin. Yeah, man. I'm good if you are. Look, Stephen, I was a dick. I admit it. I'm sorry. He then gave Arya a smile and stole a look at her naked body. Hey, Arya. Arya dropped her arms to expose her luscious breasts, nice and tight against her chest. She had thick nipples that pointed to the sky. Bud was speechless. Apology accepted, Stephen said easily. Now give us the clothes. Bud pushed the Whole Foods bag through the window, then stepped back. I'll give you guys a minute. I'll be inside. He drifted off, shaking his head as though he couldn't believe what he'd just seen. Do you really think this is a good idea? Stephen asked both women. We'll see, Arya replied. If this doesn't go well, I will wipe his mind and send him on his way. Tessa pulled off her battle-stained clothes. She wiggled into a tie-dyed dress, long enough to cover her legs. Then he won't remember seeing you naked, Arya. That was a huge deposit into his spank bank, at least a month's worth. 2 months easy, Stephen said. Arya slipped on a red dress. I don't know what that means, and I'm not sure I want to know. I understand that, Tessa said. Picturing Bud masturbating does nothing for me. Arya paused, made a face, and sighed. Spank bank, as in spanking the monkey. Very inappropriate. That's me, Tessa chuckled. Ms. Inappropriate. Stephen wiggled into khaki slacks, wickedly tight, and a polo shirt, also tight. No underwear. Which was good and bad. Bud had brought flip-flops for both him and Arya. They were going to look ridiculous, but hopefully it would only be for a little bit. How could they afford new clothes, new supplies? He'd left every bit of their cash from the Corvette sale inside the Lookout Mountain Airy. Inside the Coffee Clutch, they found Bud at a corner booth. Eduardo, the manager and motherfucker in charge, waved at Steven and Tessa. Steven didn't know why, but going back to a place where he used to work always felt a little awkward, like he didn't really belong there. He'd moved on, but subconsciously he was preparing for Eduardo to toss a dirty towel his way and tell him to go clean the microwave in the back. Bud had ordered them all their usual drinks. For Aria, that was a chai tea latte. For Tessa, a soy mocha with an extra shot of espresso. For Steven, a large black coffee. Joe Whip had taught his son to drink coffee-flavored coffee. Steven's adopted father was fond of saying, "If you want a cup of cream and sugar, order cream and sugar, but don't call it coffee." Bud had also bought food and filled the table with scones, some leftover breakfast sandwiches, and a few BLTs, the Wednesday lunch special. "I didn't know what kind of food you all wanted," Bud said, spreading his hands apologetically, "so I got a little bit of everything." "We can pay you back," Steven growled, so angry at being poor again, but he was savagely hungry. He gulped down 2 of the BLTs. Now that he was a full dragon soul, his appetite was insatiable. He needed an insane number of calories to keep himself going. "How much was it?" Tessa asked. "I have some cash." From inside the leather satchel where she kept the Dracarys grimoire, she pulled out a wad of $100 bills. Steven looked at the money in wonder. "Where did you get that?" he asked. Tessa shrugged. "You never keep all your cash in one place. I grabbed $1,500 and stuck it away for a rainy day." "It's not supposed to rain today," Aria said, then she rolled her eyes at herself. "An American idiom. Yes, I understand." Steven took a break from eating to kiss Tessa. "You're amazing." "Is amazing," Tessa said. "I'm collecting names today." Bud interrupted them. "No, guys, this is my treat, really. Y'all look terrible. Did you get in a fight or something?" "Battle," Tessa said. She then gave Steven a long look. "You're in charge. Should we tell him?" Steven finished off a blueberry scone. Eating, he felt better. Apparently being hangry as a dragon soul was a real problem. Tessa and Aria dug into the food while everyone waited on him. He stared at Bud, trying to get a sense of the guy. Then he remembered how Bud had volunteered to return to Mulk's Denver Airy at the top of the Wells Fargo building with pizza. He had been the perfect distraction. That took guts. Bud went back, knowing it meant another ass-whipping, if not death. There seemed to be a brave, noble core underneath his shallow bravado. "Bud, I have a secret," Steven said finally. "If I bring you into that secret, and if you betray us or tell anyone, we'll have to hurt you." He paused, staring Bud dead in the eye, holding his gaze. "We might have to kill you." Bud laughed, though it was a nervous, uncertain thing. Then threw looks at Aria and Tessa. He sobered instantly when he realized he was the only one laughing. The somber look on his face made Bud look older, more mature. "You're not joking, are you?" Steven shook his head. "Now, you can go back to your normal life, not knowing that secret, and we'd be cool. But if I tell you, you become a part of my crew. You become my vassal." "And you're like a feudal lord?" Bud said seriously, once again glancing at Tessa and Aria, gauging their responses. "What the fuck is going on here?" He finally said, not angry, but genuinely interested. "Tell me." "No, really, think about it." Steven sipped his coffee. Damn, it was good. As black and as bitter as an ugly divorce. Bud leaned back. "Look, man, you called me, naked, asking for clothes. You called me. I was a real asshole to you, and even Tessa got impatient with me, and she has the patience of a saint. You gave me a chance to do you a favor even after our history together. I like that. And this new you, Steven, it's so different. I've got to know. I've always said I wanted to live an exciting life. I'm thinking that if you tell me the secret, I'll get all the adventure I can handle. Ain't no way I'm going to walk away from that." Steven glanced at Aria. She nodded. Then he told Bud everything in a quiet voice as people trickled through, no idea of the extraordinary things happening so close at hand. When Steven was finished, Bud nodded and grinned. No wonder I couldn't remember that night. And I went back with the pizza? How awesome am I? Stupidly awesome, Tessa quipped. Obviously, Bud said smugly, folding his arms across his chest. Okay, but I'm going to want to see some proof. I mean, you have to transform into a dragon for me. That seems like the bare minimum. We can arrange that, Arya said, but not here. Dragon souls must be kept secret. That is our number one rule. Gotcha, Bud agreed, shooting her a finger gun. Read you loud and clear. So, you guys need a safe place to crash, and you need money, and we need to protect your families. This Mulk motherfucker is hardly going to play fair. This is total war. I can respect that. Now, let me tell you a little about me. Stephen listened as Bud opened up, really opened up, for the first time. Turned out Bud's father wasn't just a lawyer, but owned a law firm that did legal consulting for the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. Bud himself had done well in the stock market, buying, selling, and trading. He was pre-law at Metro, paying for it himself. He didn't like taking money from his father, though the two were close. He'd gotten a job at the Coffee Clutch as a hobby, but also to finance his trading and to hang out in the center of Denver. He had an expensive loft near Coors Field in the lower downtown district. That made Stephen raise his eyebrows. Bud was paying at least $3,000 a month for a place like that in Lodo. There was a lot more to William Bud Novak than first met the eye. Suddenly, Stephen was immensely glad Tessa had listened to her gut. Maybe Bud had been a douchebag of epic proportions, but now Stephen was grateful to have him along for the ride. How much money do you have again? Bud asked Tessa. $1,500? Bud sucked in a breath and then talked a mile a minute. Give me 1,000 of that. I have Fortune 500 stocks that have dipped. They're bound to go up and go up big. With your permission, I can then move that money around to work on building back your hoard. You can stay at my place until you get back on your feet. As for your families, my dad's law firm has a personal security force. I can hire 2 teams, one for Tessa's family and one for your mom, Stephen. We'll call that an interest-free loan. The security teams can keep an eye out for any shady shit going down. Stephen shook his head. No, we can't ask that much from you. I won't accept charity. Bud rolled his eyes. I'm your vassal, man. This isn't charity. This is me investing in you and your company, primacy. And if you get big, we can see about you hiring on my dad's law firm. You're going to need a team of lawyers. I guarantee you that Mulk has a legal team. You can't do shit in this world without lawyers. We're the glue that holds civilization together. At least, human civilization. Bullshit, Tessa broke in. What do you call 1,000 lawyers buried at the bottom of the ocean? Bud finished the joke. A good start. Yeah, I know. But you're going to need contracts, a will, definitely a will, and a bunch of other legal stuff. What do you get out of this? Stephen asked, eyes narrowing. A percentage of your hoard, Bud said like a lawyer. And adventure, man. Fucking adventure. He grinned and leaned forward, elbows resting on the tabletop. This is just too awesome. You worked at the Coffee Clutch as a hobby? Tessa wondered. What the hell? Bud smirked. I wanted to see how the other 98% lived. You guys have it rough. Believe me, it was educational. And the coffee was good. All right, Stephen finally agreed. But we can't stay at your place. If we go there, there's a good chance it'll be destroyed. I keep losing houses to Mulk. My apartment burned down. The Lookout Mountain area was blown to pieces, and the Colorado Springs area got hit by lava. Lava? Bud asked. Like molten rock? Stephen nodded. Yeah, portal magic. Don't ask. Okay, don't really want fucking lava in my pad, Bud said. Then again, it's only stuff. Stuff is temporary. But what you're trying to build, Stephen, that's an empire. An empire's last. Tessa reached out and took Stephen's hand. We could crash in the loft upstairs. Donnie didn't pay his rent, right, Bud? Bud raised his eyebrows. Yeah, poor Donnie. Can't get that monkey off his back. He took off a week ago. You could go up there. With 3 of you, it'll be tight, but with your arrangement, you might like that. I'll clear it with Eduardo. Tessa frowned. I have to go home, Stephen, to check on my brother. I know it's dangerous, but it's something I need to do. You do that, Bud said, while I invest your money and take care of getting the security teams set up. But if Mulk hasn't hit your families, there's a good chance he doesn't know about them. Either way, let's play it safe. What about seeing us transform? Stephen asked. Man, it's pretty fucking clear you're not playing with me. You're a good guy, Cool Whip. I can trust you. I have good instincts about shit like this. Tessa gave Stephen a secret smile. I have good instincts too. This is all going to work out fine. Stephen wanted to believe that, but even with Bud's help, they were still in trouble, and after forking over $1,000 for investments, they only had $500 to their name. How far would that go? Not far enough. Stephen closed his eyes. He needed to sleep. Both he and Arya needed another healing spell, and they all needed a good dose of Animus. Once they finished their drinks, they left the coffee clutch. Bud went one way, and Stephen with his escort went another. The sky was blue and hopeful, but a storm was coming. Stephen could feel it. They needed an edge to fight Mulk. But who, other than Bud, could help them? And why had his shield spell failed during the fight with the Terror Trio? He just didn't know. They all had a world of shit to learn, but no time to learn it. Chapter 6. Tessa took a turn driving the big orange Bronco when they headed to her house. She'd taken a buttload of Advil, so the pain of her burn was better, but her legs still throbbed in time with her heart. Keeping on top of it was getting harder as the minutes passed. Good thing that the tie-dye dress hid the bandages on her legs. They pulled off the freeway and wound their way through the back streets until she pulled up in front of the duplex in Englewood. A nice little red brick place with a quaint lawn, the grass mostly yellow, and neatly manicured bushes out front. She was never more grateful for their neighbors. The other part of the duplex was owned by two huge police officers, Bart and Barry. On many a night, Tessa and her mom had called them to investigate strange noises. Problem was, Bart and Barry would have no chance against even one dragon soul if Mulk decided to send in a hit squad. Stephen rode shotgun and Arya was in the back seat, but she was leaning forward to talk with them. There is a good chance Mulk will not involve civilians. He'll have to explain any murder of humans to the primes in surrounding territories. Yes, Mulk is powerful and has the Denver Police Department in his pocket, but civilian murders can get messy, especially in America. In India, it's easier to make people disappear. Fear shook through Tessa. The idea of her family disappearing made her sick to her stomach. I'll go in quick. I just want to check on them, make sure they're okay, and that they know I'm okay. I'm so grateful to Bud for his security team. Fucking Bud, Stephen said in wonder. Who knew he had all those secrets? Yeah, Tessa agreed. That was some undercover boss shit right there. I had no idea. I knew it came from money. You can't dress like he does unless you have some seriously deep pockets. But him working at the coffee clutch as a hobby? Fuck me. Later, Stephen whispered. Park down the street. Tessa dreaded the walk in on her hurt, burned leg, but she pulled over anyway. She needed to do this. For her family. I'll stay and keep watch, Arya said. If you are attacked, I can take them in the rear. He said we'll do that later, Tessa joked. Geez, Arya, you're such a dirty girl. Arya was speechless for a second, and then she bubbled out, I am not a dirty girl. I enjoy sex, and that doesn't make me dirty. It makes me a dragon soul. Good point, Tessa breathed. Sex positive. Come on, Stephen. I'll need to lean on you to get there. Stephen helped her down the sidewalk past lawns still withered from winter. Green shoots were doing their best to break through the brown. The smells of her neighborhood greeted Tessa. The lawns, someone cooking a roast, and someone else had a fire in their fireplace. A plume of gray smoke drifted up from a nearby roof. For a minute, she wished for simpler days, when she'd been a normal girl growing up in a normal suburb. Now, everything had changed. Nothing was simple. Tessa kept an eye out for any strange-looking characters, both on the ground and in the sky. She might not be able to see a dragon coming because she was human, and dragon souls had powerful magic to hide themselves. Stephen would see, however. He would be able to stop them. And if he needed help, Arya was still in the Bronco, parked just down the way. Tessa keyed through the front door. In the living room, her brother sat in his wheelchair in front of a big TV playing a video game. On good days, he had the muscular control to kick some ass playing any number of games, from Mass Effect to Call of Duty to Fortnite. He liked them all right, but he enjoyed some indie games more. His favorites were Undertale, Little Nightmares, Inside, and Albino Lullaby. That was his favorite. It was so horrific and awesome and strange. Jared had a tiny, withered body, but a large head with big, expressive eyes and soft, dark hair. When he smiled, it was like he smiled with his whole body. Jared spun and paused the game. His eyes lit up when he saw his sister. "Tess, well, you finally come to visit. Sure, you get a boyfriend, a girlfriend, and a new life, and you forget all about your long-lost brother." Tessa felt her eyes flood with tears, but she laughed them away. He was kidding. He was always joking around with her, but the idea of abandoning him or losing him made her get emotional. She kissed his cheek. "Ah," Jared said, "none of that mushy stuff. Introduce me to your man-child." Stephen walked up and put out a hand. Jared took it and they shook. Then he cleared his throat. "And just what are your intentions for my sister?" Stephen grinned. "I think we're pretty much married at this point. I can't imagine my life without her." Jared did his best to look distant and unimpressed. "Uh-huh. Now, what of children? I would like a niece and a nephew, one of each. Can you make that happen?" "Trying my best," Stephen said, and then blushed. "Damn, shouldn't joke about sex with my girlfriend's kid brother." Jared chuckled. "Damn, probably shouldn't curse either." He turned to Tessa. "Well, Tessa, I like him. He just might be a keeper." "He definitely is," Tessa said. "You two talk. I'm going to check on Abby." She had ulterior motives. She wanted to check every room to make sure no one was there. Yes, she was being paranoid, but this was her family. Right then, Tessa knew they had to defeat Mulk. Jared wouldn't be safe until Stephen was the Dragon Soul Prime of the Great Plains. Then, with their horde and vassals, they could stop anything bad from happening to the ones they loved. Tessa found Abby in the back of the duplex, in her sewing room, embroidering next to a window where sunlight shined down. The room smelled of the flowery air freshener plugged into the wall. Abby rocked back and forth in a rocking chair. Tessa sat down on a little colorful bench. Abby was 2 years older and so pretty it hurt, though in a far more traditional way. While Tessa had liked getting tattoos and piercings, Abby went the conventional route, with unshaved hair and bangs. She loved her boyfriend, and they had a very monogamous relationship that worked well for them. Abby and Tessa couldn't have been more different, but they'd remained close, respecting each other's decisions. Abby looked up, and a smile broke across her face like a sunrise, transforming her from beautiful to stunning. "Tessa," she said, before standing up with a squeal and throwing her arms around Tessa, drawing her into a deep hug. After a moment, she pulled away, holding Tessa at arm's length as she regarded her. "You look so good, sis," she said, "but also different. Changed." The smile slipped just a hair, then returned full force a second later. "It's love, isn't it? You met someone." Tessa only sighed. Abby always was good at reading her like a book. She dropped onto a nearby stool while Abby took the rocking chair once again. "Yes," Tessa admitted rather sheepishly. "I met a boy. Stephen." She glanced down, fidgeting restlessly. "He's changed my world, Abby." Before she knew it, she was spilling the beans on Stephen, on how cool he was, how sweet, how generous and caring. "So you're really serious about this, Stephen?" her sister asked. Tessa nodded, grinned, then tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Serious isn't strong enough. It's more than that. It's like he's opened a doorway into a whole other world for me. I've been studying. I've never been more focused. It's like magic. She had to smile at herself. Her life had literally become magical, and she'd seen doorways into other worlds on top of the St. Vrain Eyrie. So, are we talking marriage here? Abby asked. Maybe, Tessa admitted. It's only been a couple of weeks, but I already feel married. I feel like this is forever. Abby looked genuinely surprised. That's huge talk coming from you. You're not exactly the monogamous type. Would he be okay if you strayed? That's the thing, Tessa said. I don't feel like I need to. And it's not monogamy we're talking about here. There's another woman with us, Arya. Between the two of them, I can't imagine I would ever feel unsatisfied. No, things are going really well. They were quiet for a minute, Abby searching her face. There's something else, though, she finally said. There's something bothering you, eating at you, something big. She frowned, the wheels in her head clearly turning. You're worried about us, Abby finally said. Are you in some kind of trouble? Are we? Damn, she was good. Tessa had to edge around the truth. Maybe. Abby, we don't know yet. Just keep the doors locked, and if you see anything out of the ordinary, take it seriously. See something, say something? Abby asked. That's right, Tessa said. And feel free to call Bart and Barry. You know how much they love to act manly around us poor, fragile women. Abby rolled her eyes. Yeah, I know. I think they both thought they'd be dating us not a month after moving in. At first I thought they might be gay, but no, not gay. They can't stop checking us out. Tessa eased herself off the stool. Her burned leg screamed again, but she didn't wince. She had to keep up appearance as best she could. She kept a straight face as she knelt and hugged her sister in her rocking chair. Stay alert. I can't say more, but keep Mom and Jared safe. Abby nodded. I will. Now let's meet the boyfriend. Tessa watched proudly as Stephen greeted Abby. They talked for a bit, even Jared did, keeping his game paused. That spoke volumes. Stephen was confident without being arrogant, he was polite without being weak, and when he smiled, it was genuine. By the time they left, both Abby and Jared were smitten with him. The door closed behind them and Tessa fell against Stephen. Let's get back to the coffee clutch. My leg. Fuck. Stephen, it hurts. She was feeling awful, but her family was safe, and soon Bud would have his security team keeping watch. Throw in Bart and Barry and things might turn out okay. Then again, with Jared's disease, death had always been a threat. He was the product of a one-night stand after Tessa's father died, so technically Jared was her half-brother. But it never felt like that. Jared's father was good with child support, but he couldn't handle the responsibility of raising a special needs son, so he wasn't around much. Sometimes Tessa worried that Jared had too much girl around him, and she tried to butch it up when she was with him. The reality was, even if Mulk didn't attack her family, Jared's disease would eventually take him away. It was hard to think about that. Every second with her brother was precious, and she was determined to give him as much time as possible to enjoy life. Jared loved his video games, every flavor of ice cream, movies, and dogs. The entire neighborhood was required to bring their pets around so Jared could pet them. The look on his face when a cat curled up in his lap to purr was priceless. He'd already been dealt a crappy hand. She needed to keep him safe. They had to end Mulk and his threat of violence. But how? That was the real question. They needed a secret weapon. No, with the terror trio in the mix, they needed a miracle. If only her leg didn't hurt so much. Chapter 7. Stephen woke up in the loft above the coffee clutch. It was past midnight and the place was closed, but he smelled coffee. Rich, bold, enticing. Eduardo had been cool about letting them stay in the single-room apartment with a bathroom the size of a closet. The shower hung over the toilet and drained right into the floor. That sucked because now that they'd showered, the floor was wet, so when you went to the bathroom, you'd get your feet wet. Clammy, cold feet in the middle of the night made you want to reevaluate your life choices. But not Stephen. Though they'd lost everything, including Mouse, he was determined to rebuild everything, bigger and better. This time, it would be his, not some hand-me-down from his dead father. And with Arya curled up next to him for warmth, he'd never felt better. It was a tight fit in the room and on the bed, but the three had been so tired they'd made it work. Stephen reached for Tessa. She wasn't there. He slipped off the bed and knocked into a little table that held a microwave and a hot plate. Not much of a kitchen. The only sink was in the bathroom, and it was a tiny corner thing. The place was clean, though. Donnie might have had a little drug problem, but he was the neatest junkie there ever was. Stephen crept down the twisting staircase and into the storage room, and then out behind the bar. Tessa was there at the espresso machine. He took a moment to just stare at her, appreciate her. She'd grabbed an oversized t-shirt to sleep in, and though it was basically formless fabric, he could see the curve of her hips and the poke of her nipples. Her calves were so shapely above her cute feet. Her toenails were painted black, but she decorated them with speckles like stars. A chain of roses circled her left leg, while on her right was the ace bandage covering the burns. He could still see the Celtic patterns rising up from her ankle, though. They curled up past her knee and ended at her hip. He hadn't asked her yet what some of her tattoos meant. Ink was a very personal thing. Her hair was pulled up out of her face, and he could see where she'd shaved it above her left ear. While she brewed up her coffee, she had the Dracarys grimoire open next to her and was studying it intently. Stephen was brought back to all the millions of times he'd studied her while she worked, trying not to stare, looking at her and then glancing away so she wouldn't notice. Now he could lean against the wall and look as much as he wanted. He wore the khaki slacks, which he couldn't button, but the zipper managed to hold them up. Tessa turned. There were tears on her face. Stephen went quickly to her, taking her hand. "Tessa, what's wrong?" "I hurt," she whispered. "I hurt so fucking much. I rummaged around for where Eduardo generally keeps his edibles, but he's out. The Advil is stupid. I don't want to wimp out, but there's no way I can sleep with the burns on my leg." "Let's take you to Denver Health," Stephen said. "They can give you something for the pain." "We're hiding out," Tessa said. "We don't know if Mulk has contacts there. No, it's safer if I stay here and just deal. I've been going over the grimoire. It's a great primer, but I think there are other books. At least 2 more volumes. Your dad was smart. He wasn't going to put everything in 1 volume. But the thing is, they wouldn't really help if you didn't have the grimoire. Also, where it talks about other books, there's a blank passage. It's totally strange. It's like someone erased a whole paragraph." "I noticed that," Stephen said. "I tried pressing the topaz pen there, but nothing happened. Did you try?" Tessa nodded. "I did. If only we could find those other books, it might solve the mystery of the missing paragraph." Stephen listened intently. He was looking for a secret weapon against Mulk. Modern dragon souls shied away from magic and had chosen to embrace modern technologies instead, except for Stefan Dracarys, and it seemed he'd paid the price for his rebellious spellcasting. "Let's have you sit down," Stephen said. "And no coffee for you. I know you think caffeine doesn't affect you, but I'm not going to take that chance." "It was half calf," Tessa protested weakly. She walked around the bar and sat down at a table. She lifted her leg gingerly and rested it on another chair with a pained wince. Stephen grabbed the book and brought it with him. So far, he'd only been able to cast the most basic shield spell. The healing spells were still out of his reach. But that needed to change. Now. Tessa was suffering. A member of his escort was suffering, and he had the power to change it. First, he gently undid the bandage covering Tessa's leg. The skin was bright red, blistered and angry. Burns were an insidious type of injury because infection was always such a threat. Tessa turned her head. "This is so embarrassing. I feel so ugly." She pressed her eyes closed as though she couldn't bear to look. "If only I could heal myself." "We'll get there," Stephen said. He thought self-healing was possible at upper levels, but he wasn't sure. just like he didn't know why his shield didn't work against the magician's magic missiles and the green dragon's fire. Fuck, there was so much he still didn't understand. Stephen grabbed a chair and slid it over. He opened the grimoire on his lap and skipped pages until he found the Veneficium section after taking a quick peek at the skill tree. The right wing of the dragon mapped out the basic spell abilities. Stephen focused on the Cura spell. His animus was low, though. He could manage a shield spell, but not a new form of magic. He'd leveled up, which seemed to increase the amount of animus he could hold and focus at any given point, but he wasn't clear on how levels affected spellcasting, or even if they affected spellcasting. For all he knew, a level 1 could cast porta spells, which seemed to be the highest class of spell. Sure, that was probably unlikely, but he couldn't say with any certainty. "Hold on," Stephen said. He hurried through the coffee shop and back up to the loft. He bent and kissed Arya's cheek. "I need you. Tessa needs you." Arya was awake in seconds. Her hand went between his legs. She expertly drew him out of the tight pants. Stephen sucked in a breath. He stood up as she shifted in the bed to take him in her mouth. Then it was heaven in her hand, in her mouth, until he found himself on the edge. Arya stopped. "Is it her burns? Are you going to try and heal her?" "I am," Stephen said. "That's powerful magic," she replied. "Let's go downstairs." Arya was naked, but Stephen had to squeeze out of the khakis. Naked, both descended the stairs. Tessa had taken over studying the book, clearly trying to ignore her wounds. When she saw them, she smiled. "You both look so hot. I might be able to forget about the pain just watching you. Good idea, Stephen." "It's not just that. I have to heal you. Have to." Stephen led Arya to a table. She climbed on top of it on all fours. She stuck her ass into the air as a clear invitation. Stephen took a minute to admire her shapely curves and the hidden folds of her sex, which were getting warm, wet, and ready for him. The shades had been pulled over the window, so no one would be able to see them. Stephen pulled Arya's thighs apart and licked her softly. In no time, he had her wiggling against him. Tessa maneuvered around so she could kiss Arya while teasing her breasts. Arya couldn't wait. "Now, Stephen. I'm so hot, I need it now." "Music to my ears," he quipped. He helped her off the table, and she bent over it, legs spread. Tessa was there, her eyes glittering like diamonds. Stephen gazed into the barista's face while he entered Arya, who gasped. "Yes, that's it. I love you in me, Stephen. I love it so much." "Powering up never felt so good," Tessa said in a sultry voice. She sat down on a chair, pulled up her dress, and touched herself as she watched Stephen slide in and out of Arya. Stephen's chest was warming up as animus swirled around them, from Tessa, from Arya, and from his own ecstasy. "Stop for a minute," Arya whined. "Stop and let me come. Go deep, grab my hips, but stay in me deep, so good." Stephen gripped Arya's pliant hips and drove himself all the way into her core. Arya touched her secret spot, and a moment later, she was orgasming, shuddering. Her skin glowed, and she panted through her pleasure. "Watching her come is so hot," Tessa murmured. "So fucking hot." She was the next to experience heaven. Light poured out of her eyes and mouth as she radiated with animus. Stephen couldn't help himself. He went back to pounding Arya, gripping her hips, eyes on Tessa's hard nipples capping her big breasts, clearly visible through the t-shirt. Then he fell into an orgasm. Every cell in his body ignited with the mystical energy. His chest felt like an oven, but he loved it, loved the surge of power and gratification he was feeling. Still hard, he pulled out of Arya. He went to Tessa, sitting on a chair. He got between her legs and pushed himself into her. Tessa lost her breath. He stopped breathing, too. He'd gotten so turned on licking Arya, then watching the two women kiss, that he was given another batch of bliss right away. Again, the animus heated his body. He touched Tessa's face. "Magica Cura," he whispered, willing the spell to work. pumping all of the animus flowing through him into the words. All doubts were forgotten. Like before, when he had trouble becoming a full dragon, it was simply embracing his true nature as a dragon soul. He was born to fight and fuck, to cast spells, to embrace his destiny as a part of the Dracarys clan. "It's happening again," Tessa whimpered. "Oh, it's happening. It's all happening." He felt her center grip him, and then release as she pulsated around him. More animus, a lot more, swept through him, but then he channeled it into Tessa's body. They were both a supernova of love, lust, and magic. Arya went around to kiss Tessa, the act both merciful and passionate. Stephen felt dizzy, his head swimming, and his muscles ached because he was holding up his own body weight and Tessa's, both balanced precariously on the chair. Thankfully, the owner of the coffee clutch hadn't skimped on the quality of the furniture, or they might have been in trouble. But this was too much. He couldn't control his mind nor his body. He felt himself falling. But he didn't hit the floor. He found himself back at the center of the universe, where he'd gone when he'd become a full dragon soul in the sacred pools of the Lookout Mountain Eyrie. For a split second, he wondered if the hot springs had been destroyed in the apocalyptic battle that had killed Mouse. Then the thought was swept away as his mind marveled at the power he felt and the place where he floated. Around him spun stars, planets, nebulas, and every kind of astronomical wonder. He was dressed in a white robe, and he was glad for that because his father was floating there as well, and not the rambler Joe Whip. No, his real father, Stefan Dracarys. The bearded older man wore the suit he'd been wearing in Stephen's very first vision. It was black with a sleek white shirt, no tie. Stefan Dracarys smiled at him. "You've unlocked the next level of your powers, my son. I can only answer a single question, for those are the rules of life and death that bind me. One question." He smiled, small crow's feet forming at the corners of his eyes. "Think on it carefully." Stephen had no idea what to ask. He had a zillion questions. Why had his shield spell failed? How did leveling match the skill tree? But really, any questions about magic came down to one thing. "How can I beat Rahagan Mulk?" His father's smile deepened. "Yes, that is what you need right now. That is clear. The simple answer is to gather your escort, acquire your horde, and build your Ares. Let nothing stop you. I pray I have helped in some small way with that." "You have," Stephen replied. "Now, what is the more complicated answer?" He prayed he hadn't wasted his one question with something so general. The elder Dracarys nodded solemnly. "You have the Dracarys Grimoire, at least the first volume, but I had to split the books lest they fall into the wrong hands. Find allies, my son. Find the enemy of your enemy and seek wisdom from him. The power you wield is great, but it's nothing compared to the primacy you must build. Working together with friends old and new, lovers old and new, all will give you what you need. Dragon souls are not meant to be alone, though some of our kind seek that state of unwise solitude." Before Stephen could ask about the mysterious missing paragraph in his father's spell book, the elder Dracarys did the unexpected. He embraced Stephen in a bear hug. "I'm proud of you. Everything and everyone is against you, but you shall meet every challenge. The way will be difficult. In the end, however, you will be victorious." Stephen felt a wave of emotion crash through him. It was every shade of love, sorrow, hope, pain at being separated from his true family. It was years of longing for a father and some kind of connection to a world that was so full of disappointment, chaos, and suffering. An instant later, his father and their astral home were gone, faded to nothing, the coffee clutch reforming around him. He blinked and had that same feeling he had after a really good dream. It felt real and fake all at the same time, and he had to force himself to remember that he'd just talked to his father, his real father, who had embraced him for real. Stephen was on the floor with both Arya and Tessa caressing him, begging him to come back, worry in their voices. "It's okay," he slurred. "I'm okay. I saw my father." He couldn't talk. Tears were in his eyes and his chest felt heavy, but the animus, that glorious energy, still filled him. He let the women help him onto a chair. "Water," he whispered, "and something to eat. We can pay Eduardo back." "Perhaps, but that will cut into our hoard of $500, Arya said sarcastically. Stephen took what she said hard, but now they had definite answers. He gulped down half a dozen day-old donuts and then drank as much water as he could. "You saw your father?" Tessa asked in wonder. Stephen nodded. He glanced down. Tessa's leg was completely healed. Now he could see that the Celtic pattern of her tattoo was actually a series of links in a chain. Yeah, he'd have to ask her about that, but later. First, though, he told them of his vision, reciting what his father said word for word. Arya and Tessa sat on either side of him. Tessa nodded as he spoke. "The enemy of your enemy is your friend." Classic. But who do we know who hates Mulk? Arya had the answer. "Liam Strider, the yellow dragon who kidnapped me." "Him?" Tessa asked in wonder. Not sure if we're thinking of the same guy, because last time I checked, that guy tried to kill us." "Yes," Arya agreed. "But afterwards, after he failed, he was driven from his eyrie by Edgar Vale. There can't be love between Liam and Mulk. All of Liam's artwork was destroyed in the fight and fire." "Liam?" Stephen shook his head, feeling jealous. "So you're on a first-name basis with that yellow fucker?" "He's a Ronin," Arya said simply, then shrugged one shoulder. "He has no allegiance, and he had no interest in me. He's an odd one, but if anyone can help us, it would be him. He doesn't have an escort, for whatever reason." "Okay," Stephen said. "How can we find him?" A buzzing sound echoed through the coffee shop. At first, Stephen prepared for an attack. He had the animus for it, but then he realized it was only a cell phone. Tessa's phone. She got up and retrieved her cell from its holster on her gun belt. It was hanging off a chair. Tessa was smart. She'd kept her weapons close. She scrolled the phone on. Her eyes widened. "It's a text?" she said with a gasp. "From who?" Stephen asked, hoping against hope it wasn't news that her family had been attacked. Tessa turned the phone so they could see. "From Mouse." Chapter 8. Mulk grimaced. Humans. He was going to have to deal with humans, and not just anyone, but the mother of his enemy. It was a dishonorable move, he knew, and yet it was the next logical step. He sat in a Cadillac Escalade in the early morning hours with Judith and his magician, Gideon Scaramanga. The Thornton neighborhood was just waking up. A few people walking their dogs, most of the humans inside their boxes, scurrying around, getting ready for some tedious job. Pathetic. And yet the billions of apes on the planet had their uses. "Are you sure you can't find Whip using your magic?" Mulk asked the magician in the back seat. The pale, gaunt man with his colorless gray eyes shook his head. He stank. He was sick. He was a sadist. However, Gideon could do things no other magician could. Mulk growled and pushed out of the car and walked up to the house. He wore his favorite silk suit and a wool overcoat, so he was warm in the chilly spring morning. He knocked on the door. No answer. He could hear the woman, Florence Whip, in the kitchen. Why wasn't she answering her door? Was she deaf? That name, Florence Whip, seemed familiar, but Mulk shrugged off the feeling. It didn't matter. She didn't matter. And once he killed her son, he wouldn't matter. Mulk rang the doorbell. From inside, the woman's voice carried through the door. "Stop, stop, I don't want to buy anything. Go away." Triggering dark armor, Mulk transformed his right arm into a powerful scaled claw. He drove the armored limb into the door, flinging it open. He stormed inside, but not before changing his arm back. "Believe me, I am not selling anything, but I have come here to offer you a gift." The woman didn't scream, didn't run, but merely turned from the sink to dry her hands off with a purple plaid hand towel. "Well, now, aren't you the impatient one?" Florence Whip was a thick woman with wild hair a variety of colors: blonde, the red of a dye, and the gray of age. Her jawline drooped, and crow's feet collected around her eyes. Her hands were red and thick-knuckled, a worker's hands. She wore the drab beige of a custodian, but she had clear, bright blue eyes. She walked from the kitchen and into the living room. "You here to collect on some gambling debt my worthless husband promised you?" Mulk shook his head. Florence grimaced. "Oh, so it's my son. I knew he was keeping secrets from me. He's in trouble, clearly, dealing with a man like you." Mulk felt himself caught off guard. Why wasn't she quaking with fear? Why weren't there fucking tears? "So, Stephen has told you about me?" Mulk asked. "No. You want coffee?" the woman asked. "I have some. I put a little cinnamon in the pot to spice it up. I like it. You might not." Mulk found himself agreeing. "Sure, I'll try your coffee." She poured him a cup, crossed the room, and gave it to him. "I won't invite you in. I didn't. And I want money for fixing my damn door." Something was off with her, some kind of mental illness, maybe? Mulk wasn't sure. He took the coffee and sipped it. It was cheap, but begrudgingly he had to admit the cinnamon did add a certain charm. "You want to give me a gift? Fine, give me money for my door," the woman demanded. "But first, I suppose you want to get tough, threaten me, or swear you'll kill me, Stephen, my entire family. Is that about right?" She leaned against the entryway into the kitchen. "I'm waiting." Mulk found himself reaching for his wallet. Then he remembered his power and his position. "You'll get nothing. My gift to you is your life. Tell me where your son is, and I will let you live." Florence rolled her eyes, walked past him, and collected her coat and purse off the back of a sofa. She then walked out onto the small bit of concrete that made up her front porch. She turned and folded her arms across her chest. "Well, if you want to kill me out front." Through the doorway, Mulk saw a man walking a schnauzer on a leash. "Hey, Ed," Florence said. The man, Ed, raised a hand. "Hey, Flo?" Mulk laughed softly to himself. This whole situation was ridiculous. She thought she could save herself with a man and his dog. The Dragon Soul Prime moved to stand next to her. "Clever. With witnesses, you think you're safe." She sighed. "Look, I was married to a gambler for over 10 years. Actually, I'm still married to him, though he took off and left me. Do you think you're the first dirtbag to come around to threaten me? Hardly. I don't know where Stephen is. His apartment burned down, and he came into some money, and he's been living all over as far as I can tell. He's not here. I have a cell phone number, but I'm not going to give you that. And if you want to kill me, get it over with. I have life insurance through my job. He'll be taken care of." Mulk reached out and touched her wild hair. "What if I don't kill you? What if I just hurt you?" That bravery melted a bit, and she paled. Fear clouded her eyes, but then she burned that away. "I'm 50 years old. Life has hurt me already and done it far better than you ever could. I want you to leave Stephen alone. I want you to leave me alone. Or do what you're going to do." Mulk dropped his hand and sipped his coffee. It was bitter, cheap, worthless. He dropped the mug and it shattered on the concrete. "You mentioned something about kidnapping. I believe that is my next course of action. You are certainly a surprise, Mrs. Whip, and living the life I do, I don't like surprises. Your son will come to rescue you, and I will kill him. It is beneath me, but I will play the cards I've been given."
You don't play your cards, you play the other players, Florence said sharply, and yet that fear was back in her eyes. Mulk liked it there. From the side of the house, a voice he knew well said evenly, "Rehagen, we both know that nothing is beneath you." Out strutted Mouse, dressed in a thick parka and tights. She wore no shoes. Her face was bruised, and there was an awful wound on her neck, bandaged, but even with the bandages he could tell it was infected. Her hair clung limply to her head. In her gashed-up right hand she gripped the Slayer blade. "Hello, Melissa," Rehagen said. "Gideon said you managed to escape him and the others during the battle. Your father did well in teaching you the fine art of explosives." "My father taught me a lot of things," she said. "And I'm not Melissa. I'm Mouse. I've come to offer you a deal." With Mulk distracted, Florence walked off the porch. "Well, you two seem to have a lot to talk about, and I have to get to work. Close the door when you leave. The lock is busted, but we have to keep up appearances now, don't we?" "Don't come back here," Mouse said to the woman. "It's not safe." Florence laughed. "I know that now. I have a place I can go. I've not been safe ever. That's what happens when you marry a gambler. Joe was a bad egg, but he did get me set up in case bad men came around." She paused. "Nice sword." "Thanks," Mouse murmured. Neighbors were coming out of the houses now to watch the drama. Mulk growled. It had all come undone, and damn it, it should have been a simple thing to intimidate a human woman, but he was learning that nothing was easy when it came to Stephen Whip. Judith had left the Escalade, and she stood next to the vehicle, waiting to see what he would do, her face a cool mask of neutrality. They couldn't fight here, not with such an audience, no matter how plain the humans were. He could have had Gideon wipe their minds, of course, but what if he missed just one? Surely there were hidden eyes peering at them from inside the houses. It was too risky, and in the end, unnecessary. Florence opened her garage door and drove off, going a little too fast. So Mulk had gotten to her after all. Good. Now to deal with his ex-wife. "Very well, Mouse. What is the deal you propose?" Mouse limped across the driveway and up onto the porch. She was weak and weaving, and yet he knew her skill with the sword. She looked like a trapped animal. If pressed, she would fight like one. "Give up trying to kill Stephen," Mouse said. "He has no interest in usurping your primacy. If you promise to leave him alone, I'll come back to you." Mulk laughed. "You were never very important to me or my realm. I don't want you back. Somehow you destroyed the ring that bound you to me. We are divorced. You are disgraced." Mouse laughed. "Yeah, that's all true, all right. Divorced and disgraced, that's me. But I don't have parents anymore that would care. They're dead, and I'm alone. Yeah, you got me, Rehagen. However, I have information on the Rocky Mountain Primacy. I grew up there. I know how it works. You let Stephen go free, and I'll help you take over another primacy." That made Mulk pause. Everyone had thought Cassius Pine, the current prime of the Rocky Mountain Primacy, was a Ronin with no aspirations of power. Cornelius Cragor, Mouse's father, had paid the price. Now Cassius was in power, and Cragor was dead, along with a good number of his escort, including Mouse's mother. "It's an interesting offer," Mulk said. "Surely you would love to avenge your parents. You would want to kill Cassius yourself, wouldn't you?" "You know it," Mouse hissed. "But you have to swear on the soul of your father to let Stephen be. No assassins, no power plays, nothing. Do we have a deal?" "Let us ponder this situation for a moment." Mulk folded his arms across his chest. "Stephen Whip came into his power not 2 weeks ago. In that time he stole one of my wives, he destroyed one of my heiries, and he murdered one of my most promising vassals. He has eluded my efforts to kill him since, and even escaped my terror trio. His power makes Cassius look like a pup. Whip might not want my primacy now, but in the future.
No. He shook his head slowly. He must die. There is no other way.